I also got the visor on. I may have showed you this before, maybe not. I got my Fulton 800 series visor on, and I had to tweak a bunch of stuff to get it to line up nice and square. It was kind of flip-floppy as far as this, and it's still not perfect. And I'm gonna mess with it at some point, but it's just not a priority yet. And the center windshield brackets here were really wompy, and so I had to put them in my sheet metal brake and use a hammer and dolly to get them to work. I will be either buying reproduction ones or looking for some on eBay that are cleaner, because those are super scratched and just not very nice looking. So eventually, when the car is going to be that show quality, I'm going to want to have those looking a lot nicer. But you can see I got this all screwed in here and got these guys all tweaked so that the visor is centered as well, because it was kind of off to the one side. And so this is as good as it needs to be right now. Like I said, down the line, I will definitely spend some time and make some improvements, but we're gonna file that under good enough. What else have I done? Well, I got the seat in. I think you guys have seen that. And I got the dash, the steering column, all that back in. Transmission's in with the shifter for the first time. And I also switched the headlight switch from the 6-volt one that I had wired in to a 12-volt one, because I figured out that 6-volt one was gonna burn out pretty damn quick. So I got a 12-volt one, got that, and so that's good to go. I also hooked up the water temp gauge and the oil pressure gauge, and so that's an exciting thing to have done. I hooked up the temperature probe to the back side of this right here. Now, I haven't shown you this yet. What this is some aluminum tubes that I welded onto the bottom of the intake manifold that coolant will go through. It goes down, turns around, comes back in, and like I said, I made kind of a dead end or part of the loop that the water temp probe goes into. And so this is going to heat the intake manifold. Minnesota, it's cold in the spring, it's cold in the fall. I want to be able to drive this thing from probably April to October. And so having the heated intake manifold is a must. The newer Clifford manifolds have provisions so that you can run water to them to heat them. This one did not. And so I made the choice just to weld on these tubes to heat the whole manifold so that both carbs get even heat. That's also going to help with the fuel atomization. And so I made some temporary soft lines here. I'm happy with how this one turned out. Just made them out of aluminum. And this one I'm not super happy with. Got a dent in it right here. And this radius was just kind of a little wompy. And so I'm going to be replacing both of these eventually, but for this year, we're good to go. You can see I welded on a bung right here to the water neck, and then another bung onto the water pump. And so that's going to circulate water through the intake manifold. I also got the oil pressure gauge hooked up like I said. So I took the original electronic sending unit out of the block, and I actually got this fitting from Home Depot. Surprised they had it.
Jackpot.
But it's 1/8" NPT for an 1/8" tube. And so I have the oil pressure tube hooked up now. I also put in a dipstick because I didn't have one on this. And I also fixed a leak on the oil pan, so I had the oil pan off the engine. And that's when I verified for sure that the engine is a fresh rebuild. You can see all the fresh cross hatching on the cylinders, and everything looked amazing and new underneath there. The oil pan just had a crack in it right where the oil drain is. It had been dented, and since the oil drain is welded in, it just cracked right on that weld. So I hammered everything back out and then used some silicone bronze in the TIG welder to seal that up. That way I didn't have to put a lot of heat into that thin sheet metal. I got the fuel system done on the engine now. So it comes up from the hard line that I made a long time ago. Little soft line here. Goes up to the stainless steel hard line to the pressure regulator. Comes across and into a fuel pressure gauge. Then it keeps coming over and it comes into this fuel log. Now all of this is going to remain in stage 2 of the engine build, although I may replace the stainless with copper as there might be too much shiny stuff going on in the engine bay. We'll see. But temporarily for this year, just to get the car on the road, I used some rubber soft line to go from the log to each carburetor. Eventually I'm going to come out of here with hard line, and there's going to be a glass fuel filter bowl right here and right here in front of both carbs, and everything will be symmetrical. I will leave this as is, but to make it symmetrical on this one, I'll drill this port through, tap it 1/8 inch NBT. I'll take this nipple out, tap it 1/8 inch NBT, and plug it. And then this, I'll take this nipple out, tap it 1/8 inch NBT, and that way I'll be able to go on to a -6AN hardline, which is what these are, and do all of that in hardline with some glass bowl fuel filters, which will look real nice. For now, I'm just going to run a plastic fuel filter right down here. I'll chop this line and kind of make a little more of a loop and have the fuel filter down there. There also is a fuel filter in the back, but that's 100 micron or something bigger just for the fuel pump, and so I'll have a better one up front. Also, when I had the water neck off, I painted it, and then I tapped this port and put a plug in it since I'm not going to be using it anymore, and putting a rubber plug on there with a band clamp is kind of ugly and is a point of failure that I did not want to deal with. When I had the intake manifold off to do the heating on it, the tubes, I wire brushed all this, cleaned it all up, made it look quite a bit nicer. The other thing I did in the recent weeks that you haven't seen is I rebuilt these carbs. These are Weber carbs that come with the Clifford setup, and I was going to try to run them as is and see if they would work, but looking at them, they were pretty grimy, and there's even some spider nests in them and whatnot, and so I chose to rebuild them. I had 2 rebuild kits on hand, and so I just went down that route, cleaned them all up, and was able to learn a lot about them in the process, and they look a lot nicer now. I also cleaned up the what is that?
Today, Junior!
I also cleaned up the rod that connects the 2 carburetors, made sure that they were synced up. The rod was a lot longer than it needed to be, and so I trimmed that down, and everything works good. I got the gas pedal back in, and it has really good motion. You can see it's really easy to move, and it comes back really well. And then you can feel right where it starts opening the secondaries. You can see right here the part where it goes through the firewall, and so you can see right there is the primaries, and then right there you can see the secondaries open, and you can see the action of it. So it opens the carbs fully, so we'll be able to get all the performance out of them.
Let's go full throttle.
I did a return spring right here that gives it that real nice action, but doesn't make the throttle pedal too stiff. And I also rigged up a choke cable here. So this is the stock choke cable. It was only long enough to go on the back carb, so I just have it on the back carb, and welded up this little bracket to hold it, and it clears the linkage. And it's just the stock knob on the dash right here, and you can see that it opens fully and has really good action. It's real easy to open and close, don't have to put a lot of force into it. So I'm hoping to get away with just having a choke on the back carburetor.
Man, I'm so nervous.
Relax, dude.
I've been doing some research. It works for some people. Some people like doing both carbs. I do have the timing cable here. They used to hook up to the distributor that is not being used anymore because this engine has a HEI distributor, and this isn't long enough to go to the front carb, but I do have a universal carb choke cable that I can use and then just swap that knob onto it. So I'll have a back choke on the left, or back carb choke on the left and front carb choke on the right if I want to choke both of these.
Quiet.
I'll have to wait and see once it gets a little colder in the mornings if the one is enough or not, but that's something I can add on pretty easily where it all comes through the firewall here. Plenty of room to put another cable through. So we have the water temp sensor, choke cable, and then the oil pressure tube going through right there. So everything is a nice, clean, and tidy setup. There's some things I'm not happy with, but they are things that are going to be redone anyways. And so I'm not cutting any corners. I'm just trying to get this thing out on the road this summer so that any issues with the engine, transmission, rear axle, the whole drivetrain, any issues with that I can solve before things get too far along in the build process. And I also want to get it on the road so that I can see how all the suspension does, and if I need to make changes to that, like new upper control arms or redesign anything with the front and rear and how it functions, I can do that before I go and start powder coating and painting and Cerakoting and doing all that stuff to make it look good. So that's the plan, is just get this thing out on the road and see what is going to need to be done this winter. This next winter, the plan was always to tear this whole thing back apart and clean up the whole frame, clean up all the welds, smooth everything out, weld every hole shut that is not being used, and powder coat the frame, and then do the same to the upper and lower control arms, the spindles, the brake caliper, brackets, the calipers themselves, the rear axle, the rear suspension links. Just get everything powder coated as nice as I can make it. Get the engine mounts powder coated, everything like that. And then next winter I'm also going to strip the engine back down to a short block and strip the paint off of it and paint it the proper gray color. I have some side covers and a new valve cover to go on. I'll be redoing the aluminum with copper lines, maybe redoing the stainless with copper as well if there's too much bling going on, because we got chrome here and this can be replaced with polished aluminum. We're gonna have polished aluminum side covers, and I'll have a aluminum shroud on the radiator that will either get polished, or I may end up just powder coating black to kind of make things a little more subtle. I want the intake manifold to be polished. The exhaust manifolds I'm going to get Cerakoted black, most likely. So it might just be a little bit too much bling with all the stainless, and so I might swap that stuff over to copper. But I am happy with all of the fuel system right up until the log, and then this is all temporary, and I already have an idea on how to redo this to make it look better. So we'll see how that goes. Another thing here that I think I've shown you, but I'll show you again, is the vacuum port for the brake booster. As you know, the brake booster master cylinder is up underneath the dash on a 90-degree bracket setup, and so this dash 8, it's either dash 8 or dash 10, I think it's dash 10 line, is feeding the brake booster through a bulkhead fitting here. So I just welded on a bung onto the intake manifold between the two carbs, and there's internally here there's like a kind of a divider thing, and so I'm hoping that this gets, you know, steady vacuum and doesn't affect either carb any more than the other one. And then you can see the line right here goes up and connects to the booster that's up underneath the dash. So I've been getting a lot of stuff done here, and I'm gonna keep jamming, and I'll keep updating you guys. What's gonna happen next here is I need to get a buddy over here, and I wanna put the doors on the car. Once the doors are on, I'll have a reference for the front fenders. The front fenders are going to take a lot to get on. They mount to the body right here, and you're always going to use a bunch of shims to get everything to fit right. There's also a few different inner fender kind of splash panels and stuff, but the big thing is, oh, alright, sorry about that. One of my buddies called me up. I was hoping he was going to come over and help me put a door on right now, but he's not. That's right. So anyways, as I was saying, I gotta get the door on so that I can get the fender on, because the inner fender needs to be trimmed to fit the Mustang 2 modifications and the shock tower here. So the inner fender just lays right on the frame rail here, and so I am going to need to cut out anything that interferes with that on both sides. The fenders mount to the radiator core support at the front of the car, and so there's a lot of shimming and wiggling to get everything to fit right, and it all starts with getting the door on and getting the door fitting it nice and square and all the gaps even. Then you can get the fender fit off of the door, at least on the door side, get the fenders fit up, and then once you get those fit up, then you have the front splash pan and the hood, obviously. So there's a lot of variables that are going to be happening there. I anticipate that to give me a lot of problems and really be the bane of my existence for 2 weeks. In fact, the first time I drive this thing, it might not have a hood on it, it might not have a grill on it, it might not have front fenders on it, it might just have doors, just so that I can go putt it around and see what happens. But there's not a lot of information out there on the internet for that stuff. I do have the factory service manuals, and there is some information in there. At least it kind of tells you what the order of things are going to be, which is nice. And I wasn't the one that took it all apart, so there's a lot of unknowns. I have been looking at every single Fleetline that I've seen. It was just back to the 50s last weekend, and I definitely stuck my head underneath the hood of every Fleetline that I saw, and even took a few photos, so I have some ideas. I also don't know if I have all the hardware. I did get a hardware kit for the front fenders, but I don't know if I have all of the hardware for the front piece that goes kind of behind the grill and connects the two fenders in front of the core support that has the hood latch and everything. I think there's some special flathead bolts that go there that have like a nice, chamfered edge on them. So I have no idea if I have those, but things are progressing well. I'm getting a lot of the little stuff checked off the list here. And so, like I said, the real next step here is getting doors on, getting the front fenders hung, and seeing how that process goes. The other stuff that I can do in the meantime as well is I can put fluid in the clutch master and get the clutch pedal and slave everything, get the whole clutch system bled out. I can do the same with the brakes. I'm expecting there to be some leaks on the brake system, unfortunately, and I'll just leave it at that and see if there are issues. I'm anticipating a potential disaster, unfortunately, because I kind of dipshitted some stuff. All the lines are beautiful and bent nice and blah, 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 but we'll see what happens. I'll let you guys know, of course. So I can bleed the clutch, I can bleed the brakes, and I can also put the front rims and tires on this thing and get this thing on the ground, because I can power up the air suspension system and start fine-tuning that stuff. So the only reason why I haven't done that is because it'll have to go back up in the air to finish off a few things, and I'll want to have it off the ground when I'm doing the fenders and doors and everything. I think it'll just be easier to do off the ground, to be able to get underneath and see the clearances, especially with the front fenders and everything that's going on there. So it's coming along. As soon as I get the doors on the car, it's really going to be looking like a car then. It's going to light a fire under me, just like putting the visor on did. I get to look at it with the visor all the time, and that just kind of motivates me because I love the visors on all the old classic cars. And so, yeah, thanks for checking back in with me, and I'll check back in with you guys next time you see it. There'll be some doors on, maybe the engine will be ready to start, and we'll go from there. Thanks for watching.
69.